Hello there. Welcome to Scientific Serenity. The 8th century BC. In one of the most fertile strategic points of Egypt's Nile Delta, where the river meets the sea, a city rose. This was not just a port, it was a gateway. Egypt's main gateway to the world. From here, gold, grain, papyrus, ivory, and incense spread across the known world. In return, ships from Greece, Phoenicia, and Anatolia brought luxury goods, ideas, and cultures. Thonis was the heart of Egyptian customs. Heracleion was the Greek world's main stronghold on these shores. But how does a city vanish from history? How does it disappear from maps, from memory, even from the surface of the earth? The answer lies in nature's most relentless and patient forces, earthquake and water. But before we speak of its disappearance, let us imagine what it was like. Close your eyes. The sun shines over the Mediterranean. Hundreds of ships are moored at the quays. Shouts, languages, bargains fill the air. Temples made of massive granite and limestone blocks gleam in the sun. Prayers rise from the temple of Ammonius Cherub. In the streets, the white garments of Egyptian priests, the colorful robes of Greek merchants, the tattoos of Phoenician sailors create a vibrant tapestry. The air carries the scent of salt, mud, spices, and sacrificed animals. This city was the most lively, cosmopolitan, and wealthy port of the ancient world. And then, silence. Yet, how could such a vital, bustling metropolis simply fade from memory? The answer is woven into the very geography that gave it life. Thonis-Heracleion was built on the unstable, silty foundation of the Nile Delta. The land here was not solid rock, but layer upon layer of sediment deposited by the great river over millennia. A foundation that was both generous and treacherous. The city's engineers, the finest of their age, built upon pilings and reinforced earth, believing they had tamed the terrain. For centuries they were right. The city thrived as a dual entity, Thonis for the Egyptians, Heracleion for the Greeks. It was here, according to legend, that the hero Heracles first set foot in Egypt. It was here that the beautiful Helen and Paris were said to have stopped during their flight to Troy. But more than myth, it was a place of hard commerce and sacred duty. Every foreign ship entering Egypt was required to dock here first, to have its cargo inspected, taxed, and offerings made to the temple of Ammonius. The city grew fat on tariffs and trade, its warehouses bursting with goods from 3 continents. But the legends also spoke of a darker side. Ancient texts hinted at the city's pride, its opulence, and a vague sense of impending doom. Some stories whispered that the gods grew jealous of its wealth. Others spoke of the land itself growing tired of bearing its weight. Whether myth or metaphorical memory, these tales now seem like eerie premonitions of the physical truth. The ground beneath Thonis-Heracleion was living on borrowed time. For the city's fate was not sealed by invasion or plague, but by a slow, geological betrayal. The delta is a dynamic, sinking landscape. Compaction of soft sediments, combined with gradual sea level rise, means the land is in constant, subtle motion. Thonis-Heracleion was built just a few meters above sea level. Over the centuries, it began to sink, millimeter by millimeter. The magnificent quays needed constant repair. Canals silted up faster than they could be dredged. The sea, once kept at bay by human ingenuity, began to whisper at the city's gates. Then came the triggers. Seismologists now believe a series of major earthquakes, possibly around the 2nd century BC and again in the 8th century AD, struck the region. For a city built on waterlogged, unconsolidated silt, an earthquake does not just shake, it liquefies. The solid ground turns, in an instant, into a fluid slurry. Buildings tilt. Massive stone columns punch through their own foundations like stones through water. Walls collapse. And when the shaking stops, the land does not return to its original state. It settles, lower, softer, and wetter than before. Each seismic event would have been a catastrophe, followed by heroic but ultimately futile attempts at rebuilding. The people of Thonis-Heracleion would have watched their world literally sink around them. Streets would flood at high tide. Temples would develop permanent damp. The once bustling harbor would become a treacherous maze of shallow water and hidden rubble. The city's slow drowning had begun. As the soundscape drifts, hear the change. The vibrant market chaos of the first chapter is gone. In its place, a quieter, more strained atmosphere. The sounds of construction, stone being dragged, hammers on wood, are now sounds of repair, not creation. The lapping of water is closer, more insistent. The bronze bells from the temples now sometimes toll with a wet, muffled sound, as if rising from beneath the very waves. The final centuries of Thonis-Heracleion were likely a long, slow retreat. As the land sank and the waters rose, districts were abandoned. The wealthy and the powerful may have moved their operations to the more stable, upriver port of Canopus, or to the newly ascendant Alexandria, founded by Alexander the Great in 331 BC. Alexandria, with its deep water harbors and solid bedrock foundation, was the future. Thonis-Heracleion, drowning in its own silt, was the past. By the 8th century AD, what remained was a ghost of its former glory, a cluster of half-submerged islands, ruined temples emerging from the lagoons at low tide, a memory kept alive only by fishermen's tales and the crumbling papyri in distant libraries. Then, sometime in the 8th or 9th century AD, the last major seismic event finished the job. The remnants of the city, already crippled, slid beneath the waters of Abu Qir Bay. The Mediterranean closed over its columns, its statues, its streets. Mud and sand swept in, entombing an entire civilization in a deep, dark, silent sarcophagus. For over a millennium, it slept. Its name lived on only as a footnote in Herodotus, Strabo, and Diodorus Siculus. Scholars debated its location. Was it a myth? An exaggeration? Had it ever existed at all? The Nile Delta had shifted its channels countless times. The coastline had changed. The legend of a sunken city became just that, a legend, akin to Atlantis, a poetic metaphor for lost grandeur. But the sea remembers what the land forgets. In the late 1990s, French underwater archaeologist Frank Gaudiot, working in collaboration with the Egyptian Supreme Council of Antiquities, began a systematic survey of Abu Qir Bay. He was not looking for Heracleion specifically, he was mapping the submerged ancient landscape. Using side-scan sonar, magnetometers, and GPS, his team began to detect anomalies on the seafloor, straight lines, large, regular shapes buried under meters of sediment. The evidence pointed not to natural formations, but to the hand of man. Then, in the year 2000, a diver's hand, brushing away silt, touched something hard, smooth, and unmistakably carved. It was the crown of a colossal statue. As more sand was fanned away, a face emerged, a pharaoh's face, staring blankly toward a surface it had not seen in over 1,200 years. The legend had been found. Thonis-Heracleion was real. The discovery was not just the solving of a historical puzzle. It was the reopening of a door. The silent, dark waters had preserved what time on land would have destroyed: organic materials, delicate artifacts, the very layout of a city frozen in its moment of disaster. It was a time capsule of unparalleled richness, waiting to tell its story. As this first chapter closes, let the soundscape complete its transformation. The creaks and crashes of the dying city fade. The lapping water becomes the deep, quiet, heavy stillness of the seabed. The only sounds are the very low-frequency groan of the earth's memory and the soft, almost imperceptible swish of sand drifting over forgotten stone. This is the silence of centuries. This is the pause before rediscovery. Now, let's listen to this underwater silence for 10 seconds. If you'd like to join our community of explorers, please subscribe to accompany us on this ancient journey. Next, the terrifying moment this magnificent city was swallowed by the sea. Welcome back to the edge of the abyss. In our last chapter, we witnessed the rise and golden age of Thonis-Heracleion. Now, we turn to the forces that conspired to erase it. This is not a story of a single, dramatic explosion, but of a slow, relentless surrender. This is the geology of a downfall, a catastrophe written in shifting silt and seismic shudders, a disaster that played out over centuries, in slow motion. To understand the fall of Thonis-Heracleion, we must first understand the ground it stood on. The Nile Delta is not a solid landmass, it is a gift and a lie. For millions of years, the Nile River has carried finely ground rock and organic matter from the heart of Africa and deposited it at its mouth. This created one of the most fertile agricultural regions on Earth, but it created a foundation of incredible instability. The delta is essentially a gigantic, waterlogged sponge of sand, silt, and clay, hundreds of meters deep, resting on bedrock far below. The ancient engineers who chose this site at the canopic mouth of the Nile were masters of their craft. They built on pilings, used reinforced earth, and designed canals for drainage. For generations, their work held. The city thrived. But they were fighting a battle against physics they could not see. The sheer weight of their magnificent stone temples, warehouses, and statues was immense. This weight, pressing down on the saturated, unconsolidated sediments beneath, caused a process called compaction. Simply put, the sponge was being slowly squeezed. The land was sinking, imperceptibly year by year, but measurably century by century. This subsidence was the first, silent act of the tragedy. It meant that the city, built just a few meters above sea level, was gradually losing its elevation. The Mediterranean Sea, a constant presence, began to feel closer. Storm surges reached further inland. High tides lapped at foundations that had once been dry. The city's intricate network of canals, once a lifeline for trade and drainage, began to back up with salt water. Then came the earthquakes. The Mediterranean region sits at the complex boundary of the African and Eurasian tectonic plates. Seismic activity is not uncommon. For a city built on solid rock, an earthquake is devastating. For a city built on water-saturated delta silt, it is apocalyptic. The phenomenon is called liquefaction. When the intense shaking of an earthquake hits saturated, loose soil, the water pressure between the grains increases dramatically. The soil temporarily loses its strength and behaves like a liquid. Solid ground turns to soup. Imagine the scene. A deep tremor rolls through the region. In Thonis-Heracleion, the world doesn't just shake, it melts. The massive stone slabs of the temple of Ammonius Jerub suddenly have no solid foundation. They tilt, they slide. A colossal statue of a pharaoh, weighing tens of tons, shifts on its pedestal and sinks into the suddenly fluid earth up to its knees. Walls crack and collapse as the ground beneath them flows away. Streets buckle and disappear into muddy pools. When the shaking stops minutes later, the city is not just damaged, it is fundamentally altered. The land is lower, wetter, and utterly unreliable. As you sink into this reality, let the soundscape tell the tale. The deep tectonic groan returns, longer this time. It is joined by the terrifying, wet, sucking sounds of the earth losing its grip, the glug of structures sinking, the crack of stone under torsional stress, and the great, mournful splash of a toppling column hitting the newly risen water. The human sounds are screams, then shouts of coordination, then, eventually, a stunned, desperate silence. The aftermath of a major liquefaction event is a landscape in shock. The people of Thonis-Heracleion would have emerged from the ruins to find a world unrecognizable. Where straight processional ways once led to the temple, there were now sunken troughs filled with brackish water. Buildings leaned at grotesque angles, some partially swallowed by the mud. The Grand Harbor, their economic lifeblood, was likely a disaster zone, wharves submerged, channels blocked by collapsed masonry, ships tossed ashore or sunk. Yet, human resilience is profound. The historical and archaeological record suggests the city did not die after one quake. There is evidence of repair, of rebuilding. The inhabitants, bound to this place by faith, commerce, and home, would have tried to reclaim their world. They would have dredged canals, shored up walls, and salvaged statues. But they were rebuilding on a wound that would not heal. The compacting, subsiding delta continued its slow descent. The repaired foundations were no more stable than the originals. The city was living on geological borrowed time, and the interest was compounding. Scientists now believe Thonis-Heracleion likely suffered multiple major seismic shocks over the centuries. Each one would have caused another round of liquefaction, another catastrophic sinking, another desperate round of repairs. With each cycle, the city sank lower, the water encroached further, and the cost of staying became higher. The wealth that once flowed through its port now had to be spent on a futile battle against the sea itself. Climate also played a role. During the Roman and late antique periods, the Mediterranean experienced fluctuations in sea level. Even a small rise, coupled with the city's own subsidence, would have brought the waterfront into the urban core. Saltwater intrusion would have poisoned freshwater wells and canals, making the city less habitable. The very environment that made it a perfect port, the meeting of river and sea, was now its executioner. We can imagine the social and economic unraveling. Trade would have increasingly shifted to the more stable port of Alexandria. The wealthy merchant families, the international trading houses, would have relocated. The tax base eroded. The grand public works projects became unaffordable. The city's population likely dwindled, leaving a smaller, poorer community clinging to the ruins of their ancestors' glory, surrounded by the ghosts of sunken temples and the ever-present lap of water. This was the true catastrophe, not a single event, but a cascade of failures. Geological, hydrological, and, ultimately, social. The city became a victim of its own site. The location that gave it unparalleled strategic advantage for 800 years contained the seeds of its destruction. It was a masterpiece built on a foundation of sand, in every literal sense. The soundscape now reflects this long, drawn-out decline. The urgent sounds of disaster and immediate repair give way to slower, more melancholy sounds. The chip-chip of stone masons is fewer and farther between. The vibrant market clamor is replaced by the quiet trade of a diminished populace. The dominant, ever-present soundtrack is water. The drip of seepage in a basement. The slap of waves against a sea wall that is no longer high enough. The squelch of mud in a street that is never fully dry. It is the sound of a city being patiently, inexorably reclaimed. The final act of Thonis-Heracleion's disappearance was likely as quiet as it was complete. Sometime between the 6th and 8th centuries AD, after perhaps its last major seismic insult, the city crossed a point of no return. The land subsided to a level where daily tides routinely flooded the lowest districts. The cost and effort of constant drainage, repair, and rebuilding outweighed any remaining economic or religious reason to stay. The last inhabitants, fishermen, perhaps a few guardians of the still sacred but crumbling temple of Ammonius, finally gathered what they could and left. They did not witness a dramatic plunge beneath the waves. Instead, they left behind a ghost, a landscape of half-submerged ruins, islands of rubble in a shallow lagoon. Over the subsequent decades and centuries, storm surges deposited more silt. The relentless Nile, indifferent to the human drama, continued to lay down its fertile mud, blanketing the ruins. Sand from the shifting shoreline swept over the site. The sea level continued its slow, global rise. Piece by piece, season by season, the last protruding stones, the last tops of the tallest columns, slipped beneath the turbid water of Abu Qir Bay. The mud and sand closed over it all, creating an anaerobic, pressurized tomb that would paradoxically become the city's salvation, preserving organic materials that would have rotted on land. For over a millennium, the city existed only as a subtle anomaly on the seafloor, a slight mound, a harder patch of sediment detectable only to the nets of fishermen, which would sometimes snag and come up torn. It became a local legend, a place avoided, a calm El Gunam, mound of treasure, or mound of misfortune, depending on the teller, known only to those who sailed the bay. Its true name, its global significance, was forgotten by all but the most dedicated scholars of dusty texts. This long silence is the heart of the Catastrophe story. The physical sinking was one thing, the sinking from human memory was another. A city that was once a linchpin of global trade, a name on the lips of Herodotus, a mandatory stop for every ship entering Egypt, vanished not just from the map, but from the collective consciousness of the world. It became a footnote, a myth, a maybe. This narrative of slow-motion collapse carries a profound and sobering lesson for us today. Thonis-Heracleion did not fall because of moral failure or military weakness. It fell because it was built in a geologically dynamic zone whose risks were not fully understood, and because a changing climate, in its case, rising relative sea level due to subsidence and possible eustatic rise, tipped the balance from viability to impossibility. Its story is a stark reminder that the ground beneath our feet is not always permanent, and that our greatest cities are in a constant, delicate negotiation with the natural forces that surround them. As we close this chapter on the city's long farewell, let the soundscape move through its final phases. The stubborn creak of the water wheel slows, then stops. The last human voices fade away, carried off by the wind. What remains are the elemental sounds. The sigh of the wind over open water, the cry of a seabird, the endless, patient lap of waves against stone that is now just another part of the shoreline. Then, over centuries in a few seconds of sound, even those waves grow muffled as the sediment settles. A deep, thick, final silence falls, the silence of the seabed, of perfect preservation, of waiting. Let yourself go into the peace of this ancient tragedy. If these stories bring you rest, Please like the video so other explorers can find us. In 10 seconds, we will dive among these silent underwater giants. Welcome to the turning point. For centuries, Thonis-Heracleion was a ghost in a text, a rumor in the mud. Then, in the year 2000, the ghost acquired a face. This is the story of the moment the legend became stone. The story of modern humans reaching through time and water to touch the giants of a drowned world. This is the discovery. Our guide is Frank Gaudio, a French underwater archaeologist with the patience of a historian and the soul of a detective. By the late 1990s, his team had spent years surveying Abu Qir Bay, east of Alexandria. They weren't searching blindly. Ancient texts gave clues. The Greek historian Herodotus described a great temple near the canopic mouth of the Nile, where the famous lovers Helen and Paris took shelter. Strabo, the geographer, wrote of the prosperous port of Heracleion. But the Nile Delta had changed beyond recognition over 2 millennia. Channels had silted up, the coastline had shifted. The city could be anywhere under several meters of water and sediment. Gaudio's method was systematic, technological, and relentless. He used a battery of tools, side-scan sonar to create acoustic images of the seafloor, nuclear magnetic resonance magnetometers to detect disturbances in the Earth's magnetic field caused by buried structures, and satellite positioning to map every find with pinpoint accuracy. The bay's waters are often turbid, visibility near zero. They were not diving to look, they were diving to excavate, guided by maps drawn from sound and magnetism. Then, the instruments began singing. The sonar returns showed unnatural straight lines and large, rectangular shapes buried under 2 to 3 meters of sand and clay. The magnetometers spiked over wide areas, indicating vast quantities of buried metal, anchors, tools, coins, perhaps statues. A grid was laid on the seafloor. The team had found their target zone. They called it H2. The dive teams suited up. The first dives were exercises in patience and frustration. Divers descended into a world of green gloom, their vision limited to the cone of light from their lamps. They would fan away layers of fine silt with their hands, only to have it swirl and reduce visibility to nothing. They worked by touch as much as by sight. Their first finds were tantalizing fragments, shards of pottery, a broken anchor, a small, worn coin. Proof of human activity, but not yet proof of a city. Then, on a dive in the spring of 2000, a hand felt something different. Not a pot shard, not a rock. Something smooth, curved, and massive. As the diver carefully cleared the sediment, a shape emerged, a shoulder. Then, a neck. Then, the serene stone face of a pharaoh, staring blankly upward, as if awaiting a dawn that would not come for another 1,200 years. The scale was immediately apparent. This was not a small statue. It was a colossus. The soundscape shifts from the digital precision of the ship to the intimate, muffled world of the diver. The ping of sonar is replaced by the rhythmic drip-drip of bubbles from a regulator and the deep, slow sound of the diver's own breath. The silence is heavy, personal. Then, the scratch of a brush on stone, the soft whoosh of silt being gently fanned away. A moment of stillness, followed by the distorted, awestruck exclamation through a dive comm system. "I've got a face. A huge. It's a colossus." Word of the find crackled through the team. The atmosphere on the support vessel shifted from focused routine to electric anticipation. This was no longer a survey. It was an excavation of the extraordinary. Carefully, over subsequent dives, the team revealed the full scale of their discovery. The statue was a masterpiece of Ptolemaic-era sculpture, over 5 meters, 16 feet, tall, carved from red granite. It depicted a pharaoh, but in a style blending Egyptian and Hellenistic features, a testament to the city's unique cultural fusion. He wore the traditional Nemes headdress, a false beard, and held ceremonial objects. His identity remains debated, perhaps Ptolemy II or a later ruler embodying the god-king Osiris. But one giant was only the beginning. As the team expanded their careful excavation of the area, more colossal forms emerged from the gloom. They found a matching statue, equally immense, of the goddess Isis, her protective wings folded, her expression eternally serene. Then, the most breathtaking find of all, a monumental stela. This slab of granite, over 2 meters tall and weighing many tons, was the Rosetta Stone of Thonis-Heracleion. Its inscription, decreed by Pharaoh Nectanebo I in the 4th century BC, was carved in both Egyptian hieroglyphs and ancient Greek. It established the city's dual identity for all time. It declared that all goods entering Egypt through the Sea of the Greeks, the Mediterranean, must pay a 10% tax at the Temple of Heracleion. Here, in one object, was the city's name, its function, and its economic raison d'être, pulled from the deep. The excavation of these giants was a ballet of underwater engineering. They could not simply be lifted. First, a protective metal cage was lowered and positioned around each statue. Divers then used airbags, slowly and carefully inflating them to provide neutral buoyancy. The colossi, weightless in the water but still immensely massive, were then gently guided into their cages. Only then could cranes from the surface begin the slow, delicate ascent, bringing the stone kings and gods back into the sunlight for the first time in over a millennium. The emotional impact on those involved was profound. Archaeologists, hardened by years of meticulous work, described feelings of awe verging on reverence. They were not just recovering artifacts, they were facilitating a resurrection. Each statue, as it broke the surface, dripping seawater and history, was a silent, powerful rebuke to time and oblivion. They were concrete proof that the texts were true, that the legends had a foundation in stone. The soundscape here becomes a symphony of careful recovery. The deep, resonant clang of the metal cage settling on the seabed. the hiss of compressed air as the buoyancy bags inflate, the tense, filtered communications between divers. Easy, easy, she's free. Then, the low, powerful groan of the ship's crane taking the strain, and the miraculous sound of water breaking as a 5-meter-tall granite pharaoh rises, streaming with the Mediterranean, into the modern air. It is a sound of triumph, of reunion, of a circle closing across 1,200 years. The discovery of the colossi did more than prove the city's existence, it redefined its importance. These were not mere decorations. They were statements of power, faith, and identity, erected in the most sacred and public spaces. Their size meant they belonged to a city of the first rank, a city with the resources, the skill, and the confidence to commission and install such monumental art. Thonis-Heracleion was not a minor trading post, it was a grand, cosmopolitan capital of trade and religion. As the statues were studied, their stories deepened. The fine details of the carving, preserved perfectly by the silt, showed the highest quality of workmanship. Traces of pigment hinted that they were once brightly painted, towering in vivid color over the city's inhabitants. Their placement was also telling. They were found not in some random collapse, but in what appeared to be a specific area, perhaps a grand plaza or a processional way leading to the main temple. They had fallen, but not been scattered, as if the ground had opened beneath them and the water had cushioned their descent, leaving them in a tragic, solemn assembly on the seafloor. These giants in the deep became ambassadors of a lost world. Their images circled the globe, sparking public fascination and scholarly re-evaluation. They forced historians to redraw maps of ancient trade, to reweight the importance of the canopic branch of the Nile, and to see the fluid cultural exchange between Egypt and Greece not as an abstract concept, but as a physical reality embodied in stone. The pharaoh with Hellenistic features, the Greek decree on the Egyptian stela, these were the soul of Thonis-Heracleion. For the dive team, each day brought new marvels. Near the giants, they began to find the smaller, yet equally eloquent voices of the city. Bronze ritual vessels, delicate gold jewelry untouched by time, perfectly preserved wooden devotional boxes, and thousands of lead and bronze coins, the small change of a bustling economy. It became clear they were excavating not just a city, but a moment frozen in its prime, a Pompeii of the sea without the ash. The raising of the first colossus marked a point of no return. Thonis-Heracleion was now firmly on the map of human history, not as a legend, but as a foundational site for understanding the ancient Mediterranean. The silent giants, once symbols of loss, became symbols of incredible fortune, fortune that they had been preserved, and fortune that they had been found. As we leave the intense focus of the discovery moment, let the soundscape widen. The specific sounds of the recovery ship, the crane, the winches, the excited voices, blend and soften. They transform into the more sustained, purposeful hum of an ongoing archaeological mission. The ping of sonar is still there, but now it's mapping interior rooms. The diver's breath is still there, but now it's measured over hours of careful brushing in a temple sanctuary. The city is no longer being found. It is being listened to. As fish glide over ancient hieroglyphics, it's not hard to imagine the warmth of the torches that once burned here. We are among the echoes of the temple. If you wish to support us, a simple like is enough. After a 10-second moment of peace, we will uncover the hidden treasures beneath the sand. We have stood with the giants. We have witnessed their return. Now, we turn inward, to the sacred heart of the sunken city. Beyond the grand plazas and colossal statues lay the true spiritual core of Thonis-Heracleion, the temple of Ammonius Jerub. This was not just a building, it was a cosmic axis, the dwelling place of the god who sanctioned all trade, all authority, all life in this liminal space between river and sea. Tonight, we enter its silent halls. We explore not the roar of the crowd, but the whisper of prayer, the gleam of gold in the dark, the intimate breath of faith preserved in mud. The temple complex was the first major structure identified after the colossi. Sonar revealed its outline, a massive enclosure wall, a central sanctuary, subsidiary chapels, and a sacred lake. As divers began the painstaking task of excavating within its bounds, they moved from the monumental to the personal. Here, the sediment was not just a blanket, it was a time capsule of astounding fidelity. The first finds within the temple precinct were fragments of ritual. Broken pieces of faience, glazed ceramic, in the shape of lotus flowers and divine eyes, wedjat. These were votive offerings, left by pilgrims and devotees centuries apart, now mingled in the same silt. Then came the bronze, delicate censers that once held fragrant resins, small statues of gods like Osiris and Ptah, their features still sharp. These objects spoke of daily worship, of smoke rising to the heavens, of countless small acts of devotion that formed the spiritual rhythm of the city. But the silence of this temple held greater treasures. In a side chamber, likely a treasury or a preparation room, a diver's hand, sifting through the fine clay, closed around something dense, smooth, and unmistakable. He brought it to his mask. In the beam of his light, it blazed, a perfectly preserved, heavy gold ring. Its bezel was engraved with a miniature, exquisite depiction of a god, perhaps Bes, the protector of the household. It was not just an artifact, it was a piece of someone's identity, their wealth, their belief, worn on a finger 2,300 years ago. That single ring was a key that unlocked a trove. Soon, they found more, delicate gold earrings shaped like boats, symbols of the journey to the afterlife, a bracelet of woven gold wire, a pendant depicting the goddess Hathor. This was personal, sacred wealth, hidden or lost in the temple's final chaos. The mud had protected it from looters, from corrosion, from time itself. The gold shone as brightly as the day it was deposited, a silent, stunning rebuttal to the darkness. As you imagine this slow unveiling, let the soundscape become intimate. The loud, mechanical sounds of large-scale recovery are absent. Here, the sounds are subtle, the soft scratch-scratch of a plastic trowel against clay, the gentle swish of a suction hose lifting away debris, the muffled, amazed exhalation of a diver through a regulator as another gleam of gold is revealed. It is archaeology at its most delicate, a conversation with the past conducted in whispers. The temple's story was not written only in gold. As the team cleared the sediment from what appeared to be a residential or administrative quarter adjacent to the sacred precinct, they encountered the humble, eloquent objects of daily life, objects that breathe humanity into the stone and metal. Dozens of terracotta oil lamps were found, some still bearing the soot of their last flame. Imagine them, lit at dusk in a priest's chamber, a merchant's rented room, or a scribe's office, their flickering light pushing back the Mediterranean night. Their simple, functional forms connected the modern diver directly to a specific, quiet moment. Someone putting down a stylus, trimming a wick, and going to sleep. Then came the pottery. Not the fine imported wares, but the local, utilitarian pieces, storage jars, amphorae, that held grain, wine, or fish sauce from across the empire, cooking pots blackened from hearth fires, simple bowls from which people ate their daily meals. One poignant find was a child's toy, a small, wheeled horse made of clay. It lay where it was dropped or lost, a tiny testament to the fact that this was not just a city of gods and merchants, but a city of families, of children playing in the shadows of colossal statues. Perhaps the most evocative finds in this sphere were the ostraca, pottery shards used as notepads. On these humble fragments, scribes had written in ink lists of goods, receipts for taxes, personal notes, and even practice alphabets. The water had washed the ink away centuries ago, but the impressions of the styli often remained in the clay. With advanced imaging techniques, archaeologists could sometimes resurrect these ghost texts. Here was the bureaucracy that made the empire run, the mundane paperwork of a global hub, now silent and still. This layer of discovery revealed the city's ecological memory as well. Seeds, nuts, and animal bones were perfectly preserved in the anaerobic mud. Analysis told a story of a rich diet: dates, grapes, olives, wheat, and fish from both the Nile and the sea. They found evidence of domesticated animals, cattle, sheep, goats, and of wild species hunted or traded. The very soil of Thonis-Heracleion was a ledger of its ecosystem, a record of how this society fed itself from the fertile delta and the teeming Mediterranean. Each of these objects, the lamp, the toy, the pot, the seed, was a pixel in a gradually sharpening image. They transformed Thonis-Heracleion from an abstract, lost city into a living community. You could almost hear the scribe scratching his list, smell the oil lamp burning, hear the child rolling his toy across a floor. The temple's silence was not empty. It was full of these suspended moments, these unfinished lives. The soundscape in this chapter deepens in texture. The delicate sounds of excavation continue, but they are now layered with imagined, ghostly echoes of the past. The faint scratch of the archaeologist's tool is joined by the imagined scratch of the ancient scribe's stylus. The swish of the water dredge mirrors the swish of a broom in a temple courtyard. A low, melodic, almost vocal hum emerges, a creative representation of the collective memory held in the objects, a sound of countless small lives whispering their stories into the mud. The crowning discovery within the temple of Ammonius-Cherub was not a single object, but a configuration, a sacred tableau preserved in situ. In the inner sanctuary, the team found a group of ritual objects precisely as they had been placed for a ceremony, perhaps the last one ever held. A set of pure silver ritual vessels, including a stunning libation bowl, lay together. A ceremonial oar, used in the navigational rites for the god of the sea, was propped against a wall. And nearby, a collection of divine statues, smaller than the colossi but exquisitely detailed, stood in a semicircle, as if overseeing the rites. This was not the scene of a panicked flight. It suggested a solemn, perhaps hurried, but deliberate conclusion. Did the priests perform one last rite as the waters rose? Did they secure these most sacred objects in the inner sanctum, hoping to return? Or did the liquefaction event happen so quickly that it froze this sacred moment in time? The arrangement speaks of respect, not abandonment. It was as if the temple was put to sleep, its sacred objects tucked in, before the long, watery night. These finds completed the spiritual portrait of Thonis-Heracleion. This was a city where commerce and faith were inseparable. The god Ammonius-Cherub was not a distant deity, he was the divine guarantor of contracts, the spiritual customs officer. Every tariff paid, every ship cleared, was an act of worship. The gold jewelry found in the temple may have been votive offerings from successful merchants, thanking the god for a prosperous voyage. The temple was the bank, the notary, and the cathedral, all in one. The silence that now reigns in these sunken halls is therefore multidimensional. It is the silence of physical absence, of course. But it is also the silence of fulfilled purpose. The prayers were said. The offerings were made. The rituals were completed. The temple did not fail. It was simply retired by geological forces beyond its control. The objects within it were not lost. They were deposited in the ultimate vault, where time itself slowed to a near stop. As we prepare to leave the temple's sacred silence, we carry with us a new understanding. Thonis-Heracleion was not a city that died screaming. It was a city that was absorbed. Its stones, its gods, its gold, and its daily bread were taken back into the element from which its wealth sprang, the water. And in that absorption, they were saved from the plunder, reuse, and gradual erosion that destroyed so many terrestrial sites. The temple's silence is not a void, it is a sanctuary of preservation. Now, let the soundscape make its final transition. The harmonious blend of modern excavation and ghostly echoes gently unravels. The imagined sounds of the past fade first, leaving only the real, present sounds of careful underwater work. Then, even those sounds recede. We are left once more with the pure, deep, resonant silence of the temple site itself, a silence now known to be full of meaning, of gold, of prayer, and of waiting. It is a peaceful, heavy, sacred quiet. The silence of the minds and the sea unite. Subscribe to help us keep illuminating these mysteries. In 10 seconds, we will discover the legacy this sunken city left behind and its mystery today. We have journeyed together from legend, through collapse, to discovery, and into the sacred heart of a lost city. Now, we arrive at the final chapter, not an end, but a horizon. What does Thonis-Heracleion mean, now that it has been found? What does its memory, preserved beneath the waves, tell us about our past, our present, and the very nature of time? This is a story of legacy, of lessons written in silt and stone, and of the quiet, ongoing conversation between the deep past and an uncertain future. The work at Thonis-Heracleion is far from over. Each diving season, from spring to autumn, Frank Gaudio's team returns to Abu Qir Bay. The site is vast. Only an estimated 5% has been excavated. Every square meter of sediment holds potential. The mission is no longer about proving the city's existence. It is about listening to its story in ever greater detail. New technologies are constantly enlisted. 3D photogrammetry to create millimeter-perfect digital models of the site. Sediment core sampling to read the environmental history like a book. Isotopic analysis of artifacts to trace ancient trade routes with pinpoint accuracy. This is slow, meticulous science. It can take an entire season to fully excavate a single, small structure. A merchant's booth, a priest's house, a bakery. But with each painstaking effort, the portrait of the city gains resolution. Recently, the discovery of a series of wooden wharves and hulls of ancient ships has begun to rewrite our understanding of ancient naval architecture and harbor logistics. A cache of Greek and Persian coins found together speaks of geopolitical shifts and the flow of capital. Thonis-Heracleion is not a static exhibit, it is an archive that is still being read, one delicate page at a time. But why does this matter? Beyond the thrill of discovery, Thonis-Heracleion serves as a crucial benchmark. It is a perfectly preserved snapshot of a globalized node at the dawn of the classical age. It shows us how a multicultural society functioned, how Egyptians, Greeks, Phoenicians, and others lived, traded, and worshipped side by side. In a world often obsessed with clashes of civilizations, this city stands as a powerful testament to integration and synergy. Its memory challenges simplistic historical narratives. Furthermore, its fate is a stark lesson in environmental vulnerability. The city did not fall to a conqueror's sword, but to a changing relationship between land and water. The subsidence, the earthquakes, the rising sea levels, these are not historical curiosities. They are processes that continue today in coastal cities worldwide. Thonis-Heracleion is a canary in the coal mine from 2,000 years ago, a reminder that the ground beneath our greatest metropolises is not always permanent, and that water is the ultimate, patient sculptor of human destiny. As the soundscape establishes this dual theme, ongoing discovery and timeless lesson. Listen to the blend. The watery pulse of the past remains the constant foundation. Over it, the precise, hopeful sounds of modern inquiry continue their work. The click-whir of an underwater camera array, the digital chirp of a data transfer, the calm, focused voices of archaeologists planning the day's dive on the support vessel. It is the sound of a dialogue across millennia. The legacy of Thonis-Heracleion extends far beyond academia. For Egypt, the discovery has been a profound source of national pride and cultural reconnection. The recovered artifacts, after conservation, are displayed in museums in Alexandria and Cairo, where they stand as majestic ambassadors of a forgotten chapter of Egyptian history. One where the Nile Delta was a dynamic, international gateway, not just an agricultural hinterland. For the global public, the city has become a symbol of hope. It proves that not all lost treasures are lost forever, that the sea can be a protector as well as a destroyer. This sunken city also forces us to reconsider the map of the ancient world. For centuries, Alexandria was seen as the sole great Egyptian port of the classical era. Thonis-Heracleion reveals a predecessor and a partner, a crucial hub that managed trade for centuries before Alexander's city even existed. It rebalances our understanding, showing a network of ports and a shift in power and geography over time. The memory beneath the waves corrects the memory on dry land. Perhaps the most poignant lesson is one of humility and perspective. The merchants of Thonis-Heracleion believed they were at the center of the world. Their city was wealthy, powerful, blessed by the gods, and seemingly eternal. Yet, it disappeared so completely that it became a myth. This is a powerful memento mori not just for a city, but for civilizations. It asks us, what of our own global hubs, our own centers of wealth and power, will remain in 2,000 years? What will be buried, and what will be remembered? Thonis-Heracleion whispers that all human constructs, no matter how grand, are temporary negotiations with the planet. The ongoing mission also highlights a new kind of stewardship. The site is now protected by Egyptian law and monitored. The excavation is non-invasive, preserving the context of every find. The team's goal is not to strip the site bare, but to understand it, to learn from it, and to protect it. The memory is not being looted, it is being carefully translated. In an age of climate change and rising seas, Thonis-Heracleion becomes a laboratory for understanding how to protect and study underwater cultural heritage, which will become an increasingly pressing concern as more coastal sites are threatened. What still lies buried? The possibilities are endless. The personal quarters of the city's elite. The archives of the temple, which could hold papyrus scrolls preserved in the anaerobic mud, a potential library of lost texts. More ships, which are time capsules of technology, cargo, and daily life at sea. The team believes the city's necropolis, its city of the dead, is yet to be found, which could reveal untold stories about the people themselves, their health, their origins, and their beliefs about the afterlife. The memory is vast, and the surface has barely been scratched. The soundscape in this chapter becomes more contemplative. The active sounds of mapping and excavation soften, moving into the background. They are joined by more expansive, thoughtful sounds, the deep, resonant tone of a singing bowl, symbolizing the city's lasting vibrational imprint on history, the soft, echoing notes of a piano, representing the melancholy and beauty of recovered memory, and the faint, hopeful sound of a choir humming a single, sustained chord. The collective voice of curiosity and preservation that now surrounds the site. As we bring our journey to a close, we return to the central image, a city asleep beneath the sea. But our understanding of it has been transformed. Thonis-Heracleion is no longer a ghost. It is a witness. It witnessed the height of human ambition, the fusion of cultures, the fervor of faith, and the relentless patience of natural forces. Its memory, encoded in granite, gold, and clay, is now awake and speaking. This series has been more than a catalogue of discoveries. It has been an exercise in time travel, not with a machine, but with the mind and the heart. We have stood on the bustling quays, felt the tremor of the collapsing earth, shared the diver's awe at the face of a giant, held the gleam of a gold ring in our mind's eye, and now we sit in contemplative silence with the temple's last rites. We have completed a circle that was broken for over a millennium. The story of Thonis-Heracleion is ultimately a story about connection. It connects Egypt to Greece, the river to the sea, the past to the present, and archaeology to the future. It reminds us that history is not a straight line but a deep ocean, with layers upon layers, and that sometimes the most profound truths sink before they rise again to illuminate us. For you, the listener, drifting towards sleep, let this story be a bridge from the anxieties of the present to the grand, slow perspective of deep time. A bridge from noise to silence. A bridge from forgetting to remembering. The city's fate teaches acceptance, that all things change, that even great things pass, and that there is a strange peace in that cycle. And its rediscovery teaches hope, that nothing is ever truly lost, that curiosity and care can bring light back to the darkest depths. So, as you rest tonight, imagine not the ruin, but the wholeness. Imagine Thonis-Heracleion in its prime, a beacon of light and life on the edge of the water. Then imagine it as it is now, a serene underwater museum, its artifacts dreaming in the blue gloom, visited by fish and archaeologists, a secret shared between the sea and those who listen closely. It is both gone and here, lost and found, a memory and a living lesson. This is the gift of Thonis-Heracleion. It does not haunt us, it grounds us. In a world of rapid, shallow change, it offers the weight of centuries. In a time of division, it speaks of ancient integration. In an era facing environmental uncertainty, it provides a deep time perspective on resilience and adaptation. Its silence beneath the waves is not empty. It is full of meaning, waiting for anyone willing to dive deep, in thought, in study, or in dream. Thank you for joining us tonight. If you found peace, Feel free to explore our other videos and join the Scientific Serenity family. Now, you are left with the hum of the Mediterranean underwater. Into a deep sleep. Good night.